Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome today to a fantastic episode of Saptarishis Astrology. We have a very senior astrologer, a scholar, extremely technical, known for her researches. Please welcome Edith Hathaway from USA. Edith, hi, how are you doing?
Very well. Thank you, Sunil. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you, and it's an honor to have you. Your articles in Saptarishis Astrology have been stunning. People have loved the depth of your articles. Let me remind the new ones. Edith wrote an article on Graha Yuddha, that is planetary war. And it was an extremely detailed article, new research. Very senior astrologers wrote to me. And in fact, one of them wanted to take a piece of that research, giving credit to Edith, and he said he's never seen something like this. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Edith.
Thank you.
We've known each other, I do not know, 10 years or something, but last I remember meeting you in 2010 October at the World Mundane Astrology Conference.
That's right.
And we spent some time at Yogi Ji's ashram. It was a wonderful time. For the young ones, Edith has been an old hand at astrology, Western astrology. She's written a book on Western astrology. She's also written a book on Vedic astrology. She's been doing astrology for a very, very long time, from the 80s, if I'm not wrong.
1976, I first started studying, and I started my professional career, you might say 1980, when we feel we've had enough training to do our first readings. Yes, 1980. But 40 years as of this year.
Oh my.
40 years of study and experience, yes. Alas.
She's been extremely popular for her World Mundane Astrology predictions. And she's also been the founding member of ACVA, American Council of Vedic Astrology. Am I right, Edith?
Well, yes, I guess American Council of Vedic Astrology and American College of Vedic Astrology, those two organizations founded right around 1992, 93, yes. So I've been a board member, a faculty member, and yes, very involved in both, and now in the Council of Vedic Astrology, yes, all American organizations.
Also, I presume you've also done the astrocartography. You've been good at astrocartography, right? From Jim Lewis, you did it?
Yes, I did receive a certificate from him. Not easily won, I tell you that. He was quite a difficult taskmaster. So if you got a certificate from him, that was something. So yeah, very, very interesting work, the astrocartography relocation.
Relocation, it's really helpful. Some of you might not be knowing much about ACG, but we're going to come up with a lecture on it, and it's one of the most beautiful of sciences by Jim Lewis. Absolutely fantastic. Also, with Vedic astrology, when did you start?
Well, I would say 1988, but just before we go on from that, I would say that astrocartography is something I learned in Western, I was still in Western tropical astrology, but I use a lot of the Vedic principles with it, and I find that those are very meaningful. So, for instance, somebody has say a Pisces ascendant, and they might be yearning to go to their Venus line. Well, as Vedic astrologers, we know that Venus rules the 8th house. So it's not going to have the same effect. And I have dealt with clients who've had these issues which is confusing, let's face it, because they're told by a Western tropical astrocartographer, relocation astrologer, that Venus would be great for love matters, arts, and so forth. But so those are some of the differences. Also, we can work with Digbala. So if you have a Saturn Dasha, Saturn's your Raja Yoga Karaka, you've got Saturn in the 7th house, would you be Digbala? That works great in astrocartography, except that, of course, it's going to push you to work very, very hard. So I say except, that's Saturn, isn't it? So.
You and me have several friends in common, and I have been using astrocartography since 2003 or 4, and I've seen it work fantastically. Unfortunately, the Indians in India do not use it. and they can find their love life, their career, health, all things. You should one of these days come and speak on Saptarishis Astrology, on how you have used it for your clients and they have benefited out of astrology.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know, maybe it's no accident that it came from an American astrologer, Jim Lewis, who was the first pioneer of it, because Americans tend to move around more, perhaps, than Indians do.
Yeah.
Although you have the Indians, moving to the United States in some cases or other locations. But that may be why, because we've got a large country in which people tend to move around, so you can test it out.
True. True. So coming to Vedic astrology, did you ever meet B.V. Raman? I mean,
yes, indeed, yeah. And you were asking me, I'm sorry, I took that diversion into astrocartography, but in 1988, which is now a Saturn cycle ago, so 30 years, 28 to 30, I consider within the Saturn realm. But 1988, I was preparing to write my book on Western tropical astrology, which is called Navigating by the Stars. And that was published in 91. And yes, there was this, I don't know if you want the whole incident, but in any case, an astrologer, okay, I'll tell you the incident. A client came to me and insisted that I look into this. And of course, I had all these fancy Uranian astrology methods and astrocartography and all the best of the Western techniques, secondary progressions. And she wanted to know how this Vedic astrologer got this exact prediction. And could I find it, and I should find it, in Western tropical astrology. And this Vedic astrologer was Chakapani Ulala, who faithfully turned out to be a great good friend, colleague, and my mentor, and from whom, of course, I got the Grahayuta, some of the he shared with me that his father and grandfather had used, and then I expanded on those principles. But I did originally get that material from him, the core material. So that was that connection right away. And the summer of 1988 was with Chakapani. I then booked a reading with him, but I never could find the reason I booked the reading, because I couldn't, I rolled up my sleeves. I could not find how, I think the incident was that she had fallen off her horse. Mm-hmm. And he had predicted exactly when it would happen and how it would come about and what would be the repercussions, and so it was quite impressive, and I could not find it. So I thought, this must be a pretty powerful astrology. I should at least have a reading. So I did, and at the time I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where fortunately David Frawley lived. Okay. So I knew him. Yes, so I knew him, and I think your audience would probably well know David Frawley.
Yes.
Yes, Vamadeva Shastra, I think is his full name in Sanskrit. And so yes, he lived there, and through a circle of people, I knew him already as of about 1985, because I moved there in 83. In fact, if you want to talk about synchronicity, mm-hmm. We both moved there. I moved there from the East Coast, New York City. He moved there from the West Coast, California, on the same day, we figured, or within one day. Yes.
Oh, that's synchronicity.
Yes. That's a little spooky, isn't it? Yeah, late February of 1983. Okay. And I would spend about 21 years there. He still lives there very happily, and has his whole center there and everything. So anyway, David was one of my first teachers, as was Chakapani, and then our whole organization, the ACVA, the American Council of Vedic Astrology, College of Vedic Astrology, all of that started to form in 1992. 92 was our first conference, and that was in San Rafael, California, mm-hmm. Just above San Francisco. And at that first conference, that was in October of 92, mm-hmm. B.V. Raman was the keynote speaker. Oh. Yeah. And he came with his wife, and I think I'm trying to think whether his daughter was there as well.
Gayatri?
Yeah, Gayatri. Yeah. I'm not sure she was, but I know he was very alert, very, still in, very good form.
So did you, I'm very curious, sorry to interrupt you, I'm so curious. Did you get a reading from B.V. Raman? Ever?
No, no, but there were many great astrologers who came. C.S. Patel came.
Yeah.
Of course, that's where I met Dr. Charak.
Okay.
Dr. K.S. Charak came. And of course, K.N. Rao came in 1993. It was very galvanizing.
Okay.
Very, very galvanizing. Certainly was a great influence on many of us. And of course, I know he's very close to you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was pivotal. And we all bought all his books. And I will say that definitely kind of pushed a lot of us into gear. We were able to organize a lot of the technical principles better because of K.N. Rao's teachings. And it was lively, it was funny, you know, all the things that K.N. Rao is.
I know, you, me, and K.N. Rao and Dr. David Frawley, all of us were together in October 2010 at the World Mundane Astrology Conference.
Yes, yes.
He had a special liking towards you because you and he both are into mundane astrology, and not many Western astrologers, or rather from USA, are doing mundane astrology. And I admire you. I admire your work, you know, because it is so tough. Of course, today's discussion is on the US presidential elections, but it's so tough to go there, predict, and you know, you are predicting with maybe a wrong birth data.
Well, that's the thing that if you can use, and I think that I make the point with this, the talk I'm about to give and exchange with you is on the U.S. presidential elections, which I've studied really since '92. I've been making predictions on successfully since '92, with the exception of 2000, and I'm going to show how from that error on that 1 year, which now I think, how could we have missed? But from that error in that 1 year, I came back to the drawing board and came up with some of I think a very interesting predictive model, which I will present here. I presented it before, but I've never presented it in graphic form. So that's my 160-year graphic model. But yes, I think, and part of that in 2000, and we did actually have good birth charts for Al Gore and George W. Bush. Those were not contested birth charts. It may be something about the emotionality of elections, the difficulty in staying neutral when you're in the midst of it and you're a citizen of that country. There may be something like that. And oddly enough, we had a conference right in the middle of that in November in Orlando, Florida, not far from if you recall, in that 2000 election, it was in Florida where they had the recount. And we had a conference in Florida, and we thought we would know the result when we got there. And no, it went on, as you remember, it went on all through November. And it was not decided until the Supreme Court, all of that, December 13th. So that was a watershed year. And from that, I shifted some methods. I think a lot of astrologers had to go back to the drawing board if they cared about predicting elections anymore.
Yeah.
And that's when, just to connect to your point about mundane astrology, I started putting more faith, I think, from then on in mundane charts to predict elections.
So, okay, let me ask you a question which can be this uncomfortable, is how far do you see Vedic astrologers have been successful consistently on the US elections or mundane elections? I'm talking about the American sphere, you know,
so American astrologers predicting successfully. Oh, let's see. Now I've been involved. Let's see. We had what we call the United Astrology Conference, where all the organizations come together, and usually there's been a Vedic track. And I was on the panel, what we call the presidential election panel. I was just on one here in 2016 at a big local conference recently, and also in 2008 and 2012. And those panels, essentially about 6 members on the panel. Everybody mostly predicted correctly, but a lot of people were, as I recall, because it's hard to remember exactly, a lot of people were not willing to say 100%. I think I was the only person who stuck my neck out and said, I'm willing to say 100% I'm sure of this.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, I'd have to, exactly how accurate everybody was or how many, there's not a lot of Vedic astrologers. I think there's more Western tropical astrologers than there are Vedic astrologers in the U.S. So there's tends to be more Western tropical astrologers predicting elections than
but still,
than Vedic.
hats off to
A
you
lot
guys,
of, because once, you know, you're out there with. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm saying hats off. You know, it takes a lot of hard work and guts and courage to make a prediction and to stick with that. You know, I would never be able to predict.
Yes.
You know, it's too scary for me. I mean, if I predict 1 year in advance or even 1 month, it's too scary. My heart will keep on beating. So it's a tough job. It's a tough job.
Well, I think what I hope to take you through with these slides is the process of an astrologer thinking out loud, because a lot of astrologers tend to like these inauguration charts, for instance, because we know on January 20th, unless it's a Sunday, in which case it goes to January 21st at 12 noon, a new president, every 4 years, a new U.S. president will be inaugurated, or will, even if for some reason it doesn't, you know, it's still officially in the Constitution. So you could say, well, might as well look at that chart. I like it much better than, say, election day charts, because where do you locate it and what time of day?
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some people who use, there's a place, I think it's called Fort Dixon Notch or some crazy kind of name in New Hampshire. That's the first at midnight. They have about 30 people in the town, and they have the privilege of the first people to vote on election day. So some people do a chart for this location in New Hampshire. And other people do it for the last one. Well, you know, or 12 noon on Washington, D.C.
Okay.
But quite frankly, you know, and then what do you do about all the people who've mailed in the early votes? So, to me, just doesn't work.
Okay.
That might mean something. Maybe I haven't figured it out. I'm not saying it's meaningless. I'm just saying I haven't figured it out. Okay. Too many variables.
Okay. So shall we start with the slides? And before that, I'd like to, you know, just update our viewers that this is a technical session. It can be a bit advanced for the young ones. You know, please understand that Edith has been doing this for a long time. And I would just request Edith to take all the kinds of audiences we have, from the young ones to this, so that they can learn from you, you know. And I know you are a great researcher, you know, but some of us Indians might not know what's an inauguration chart. So you could just add a line to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I get you.
I appreciate it.
We'll start with some simple definitions to get people started off. And interestingly, a lot of this is related to the Jupiter-Saturn Graha Yuta. So it's nice that you mentioned that article.
So guys,
do I do the slides from my end or your end?
Yeah, I would share it from my end, and you can also open it from your end. You know. Okay,
I've got it up there. So do I go to the next slide now?
Yeah, I'll just first share.
Okay, I just moved it to the second slide.
Okay. So here we have the predicting U.S. presidential elections by Edith Hathaway. So the second slide is Jupiter and Saturn cycles. What's this?
Okay, so we're going to look at larger cycles and smaller cycles. And of course, remembering in Vedic, classical Vedic astrologers. Now, I realize I've lost your picture up in the upper right. Is that okay? We're okay to go?
I can see. I can see.
Okay. So just for reference, I think this is a point that most of your viewers would know, that Jupiter and Saturn are the Dharma and Karma planets. They're the major timer planets for social, political, economic, cultural matters. And Jupiter ruling over Dharma, Saturn ruling over Karma. These are the major timer planets, kind of the two hands on the clock. So when we look at the larger cycles, we'll just go over the basics here, that it takes 59,575 Jupiter-Saturn cycles to make a yuga, or world age. And then if you want to go and multiply that by the magic Vedic number 432, you get 432 seems to be a magic number that keeps showing up in the Vedic literature. You get a precession cycle. So it's deeply embedded in a lot of the Vedic astrology, exactly what Jupiter and Saturn are doing. Now they come into conjunction in one element. So water, fire, earth, air, water are the elements, and it comes into one element, an average of 243 years each. Now, I've examined the period from 1400 to 2400, as you'll see in a moment. So that's what the average is in this period of time, and I imagine that's probably going to carry through for most of the 1,000 years. Now, when it goes back and forth, so it shifts back and forth, we call this a mutation period, a time when the element is shifting from the dominant element to another element. So it goes back and forth, kind of like the Chidra Dasha, the tail end of a Dasha, is giving you the tail end of that Dasha and a little bit of the flavor of the next Dasha. You can think like that. And it can be as little as 60 years or going up to 141 years. The fire, if you've got any fire in there, it tends to shorten the mutation period. Water tends to lengthen it, kind of long incubation periods. Okay, shall I move to the next slide, which is slide 3?
Okay.
Do you want to do that, or shall I?
Yeah, you can do that also.
Okay, all right. So this slide, slide number 3, is called Jupiter and Saturn cycles, the smaller ones. Now, many of you have heard of the 60-year Jovian cycles, and the names of those. This year, for instance, we are in the Durmukha period, and sometimes you can make predictions based on those. I've noticed that the last couple of years were relatively smooth, not for some people in the world, alas, but relatively smooth up until this year, the Durmukha, and the next couple of years, just by the Sanskrit name for those Jovian years, the individual Jovian years, we can get a flavor of that year. So that doesn't figure in so much here, but you can see that this has been a very, for the US presidential election of 2016, it's been quite a fraught year, very much of a roller coaster year in keeping with the Durmukha year. Now the 20-year period is how long it takes for Jupiter and Saturn to come round to the conjunction again. Each time is 20 years.
Okay, so every 20 years, could I just ask a question? Every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn get conjunct.
Correct.
Okay, okay. Please go ahead.
Yes, and so when they come into conjunction and when they come into opposition, last time was in 2010, 2011. A lot of things. I've written a lot about that point. In fact, a lot of this is contained in the first chapter of my book, In Search of Destiny.
It's a wonderful book. Wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you. My 2012 book. And so at the 10-11 year mark, so that's going to be the opposition, it tends to show when people are questioning the status quo. When did we have the Arab Spring, for instance? Was in 2011. January, I think that was started in Tunisia in January of 2011. Now, the other cycles, probably well known to your viewers, 29.6 year Saturn orbital cycle, how long it takes Saturn to complete one orbit all around the sun. Now, we know that it can return to the same sign anytime between 28 years and 30 years. And Jupiter, so these are the exact average, well, exact, yeah, the time it is considered to take its, to run that complete orbit. Similarly for Jupiter, it's 11.9 years for its complete orbit. So we notice that 5 times 12 equals 60. Saturn, 2 of its returns is going to come between 58 and 60. So that 60th year for an individual, a corporation, any kind of event that we're following, the 60-year mark, again, equaling the Jovian years as well. Very, very a pivotal period of time. Now we notice with the presidential election cycle in the US, it's every 4 years. So it's convenient to round off the Saturn cycle to 28 years, and Saturn, of course, is very close to 12 years. So next, okay, and I did actually put at the bottom of that chart and this is your slide number 3 on the smaller cycles, that the 160-year prediction model, which I'm going to show in a moment, runs from 1940 to 2100, and this coincides with U.S. presidential years.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I mentioned that Graha Yuddha plays a big part here. Graha Yuddha is the planetary war, and if you go back to that article, the first time I presented it, this was probably about 2000. The article came out in 2002. The research I did started in probably mid-late 90s. And it's explained in that article how Chakapani did give me these principles when I went to him and I said, I can't get any of these conflicting principles from the classics to work. They're all, you know, they're one different from the other. So which ones do I go with? And he said, I don't use any of those. And I said, well, what do you use? So alas, that was the beginning. That was the beginning. And so from that, with his initial supervision, I did a lot of research and expanded, you know, nailed down the principles. And for our purposes here, we should know, of course, the main principles, which I'll review, and your viewers should go to that article, which is at Saptarishis. It's also at my website. The article I expanded and amended from the 2002 article, so it was expanded to, I think it's runs about 28 pages, with examples of every possible combination, because the only way planetary war can occur is through 5 planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. But with Jupiter, so the principle is that, number one, if the planet is the largest of all; secondly, the brightest of all, the luminosity; and thirdly, the speed, the orbital speed. So without getting into all of that, with the other planets, we'll say that Saturn is always the winner. Now you might say, why? Because Jupiter, after all, has greater mass. But Saturn, with its massive ring system, is more significant. And as we know, karma, you have to say that karma outdoes dharma, even though they're inextricably linked. Karma wins out. And so for many reasons, Saturn is the winner over all planets, including Jupiter. Now, even recently, they found some extra, infrared camera found yet another ring. I don't know if you know that. Strange angle to all the other rings. So it's a kind of oblique angle to all the other rings, and was spotted within the last 10 years. I don't have the exact date. So yet another ring to prove how massive Saturn is. So we say that Saturn's victory in the planetary war, the Graha Yuddha, is maximized in Earth or air, especially Capricorn. Now why? Because it rules over an Earth sign, and it's exalted in an air sign, Libra. And it rules, in Vedic astrology, it rules 2 signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. So Aquarius is an air sign, Libra is an air sign. So Saturn has its victory maximized in Earth or air. Jupiter's loss, similarly, is minimized. It's less. It's still, you know, we say technically with Graha Yuddha, the planet that's defeated is crushed. Okay, well, we're seeing a lot. I'm going to talk about some of this because we're in an Earth period now. But Jupiter's loss is minimized when it's in fire or water signs, especially Sagittarius. Now, why is this? Jupiter rules over a fire sign. It also rules over a water sign, Pisces, and it's exalted in Cancer, another water sign. Okay, so now we are going to slide 4. Again, these will get some basics down here, and then we'll go straight to our graphs and charts. Okay, so Jupiter, this becomes very important when you want to assess, well, okay, so it's losing the planetary war. In mundane astrology, what does that mean? If you're doing your natal chart, well, we'll look and see if it's your ascendant lord, then obviously it's going to affect your physical health, your physical well-being and stamina and so forth. But this is mundane astrology. So in mundane astrology, Jupiter rules over there's a list of things that are at least the basic things we're concerned with. The nation state is Jupiter. The urge for national identity, patriotism, humanitarian and ethical concerns, law and lawyers, religion and its leaders, higher education and teachers, journalism and journalists, publishing industry, urge for political and individual freedom, which of course is very linked to patriotism, the urge for national identity, and lastly, royalty and ruling monarchs. Now, royalty also figures very strongly with water, and you're going to see that when we look at the water period.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Normally, like the publishing industry and all that, journalism, and wouldn't that ideally be Mercury, ideally speaking?
Well, Mercury would be, here's the way I've looked at it, and I actually did in my most recent article, and I've got about 125 pages so far, just if you did a PDF, by PDF, on the US 2016 election, presidential election.
Okay.
And you have in one of the charts, because I did a lengthy analysis, I think it's my most recent article, that's dated September 28th. I did a lengthy analysis of the first presidential debate, September 26th, 2016. And there was, so you had Mercury, Jupiter had left, okay, so September 26th, Jupiter had left Leo, right? Sidereally, all of the sidereal zodiac. And Mercury, so Jupiter was in Virgo, Mercury was in Leo with Rahu, north node, north lunar node. And so I assessed that as Mercury was the moderator, the journalist, because these debates, the moderator is a very significant person, right? The moderator does the questioning. The moderator, they're tremendously dependent on, you know, it's supposed to be neutral, but they can be more friendly towards one candidate than the other, even if they try to hide it. And in one, yeah, so I read that as the Jupiter was the media and the owners of the company that Mercury, so I'm just kind of answering your question a little more technically, but in a way that I would read that. Jupiter rules the media company that I think in that case, what was it? I can't remember, it was CNN or what company it was, NBC. It was Lester Holt. And I don't have his company right in front of me. But anyway, it was that media corporation. I would call that Jupiter. And then Rahu, Mercury, was the specific journalist, you see. So, but it could, you know, I mean, you're right. It could definitely, I mean, when Jupiter was with Rahu, I was definitely, for all those months, I was definitely looking for some breaking out of media, some extra, and I do feel this particular election, the media has a very significant role in it.
Yeah, and it's been quite a nasty one also, you know, with accusations flying and tapes coming out, media, you know, old recordings of Donald Trump.
Yes.
It's been tough.
Go ahead. Been very tough, but what we say here now, let's go
to the slides.
I mean, your question, just one more and you'll see, because this is the end of the definitions, I believe. This one's important to consider when we're looking, because when we look at Jupiter and we see all its significations, then here's Saturn.
Okay.
And so how are the significations of Saturn impacting those of Jupiter? Well, you notice at the top of the list I put for Jupiter is nation states.
Yeah.
Top of the list for Saturn is business, transnational corporations, corporate conglomerates. Okay, and this is, you know, at the conference you and I met at in Vishakhapatnam in 2010. This was my lecture topic, in fact, was corporate conglomerates versus nation states. Which nations will survive and thrive? I think you also printed that.
I think yes.
In Saptarishis, it's also at my website. So either place. So very critical interaction between the corporate conglomerate, and how is it appearing to crush the nation state? Well, it's got a huge amount to do with that. So let's go down our list. Status, consolidation of material resources and powers, very strong in Capricorn. material security, iron, lead, zinc, black metals, coal, fuels, especially oil, gasoline, chemicals, inferior grains, leather goods. I think another one was black liquids. I think of how prolific Coca-Cola is in this era. It's a black oil Coca-Cola one. One you can drink and one your car drinks. Okay, weapons of defense, very important. And you might say, well, wait, yeah, it's democracy. Or looking, this is where I have tweaked this a bit. Or looking like a democracy.
Okay.
May not be actually a full democracy anymore, but at least it looks like it.
Yeah.
And that had some play in how I assessed which nation states were going to survive and thrive. All right. Oh, we did have one or two more of these. Okay, I guess this is the last of the definition. So we're going to see in which element does the conjunction occur, in which sign and nakshatra does it occur. And notice also, and we'll see this on the graph, a lot of people haven't thought about this, but there's extra intensity when you have Jupiter-Saturn conjunction occurring 3 times in a row. 3 times, okay? And if it's Vargotama, I think your viewers would know where Vargotama is?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yes, occurring in the same sign in the Rashi and the Navamsha. Right. Especially when that Vargotama occurs in a sign owned by Jupiter or Saturn. Also, when that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction coincides with the solstice or equinox, which we have coming up in 2020. We had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the winter solstice. Now this next slide, which is slide number 8, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, the larger cycles, and sidereal Lahiri Ayanamsha is what I use, 1400 to 2400. Now this graph and the next one, I've been talking about these for some years. This one is essentially the first, well, with a lot of description, a lot of text, a lot of historical examples. This is the first chapter of my book, In Search of Destiny, Biography, History, and Culture as Told Through Vedic Astrology. That's a subtitle, which came out in 2012. Now, so you might say, okay, and you notice the triple conjunctions. I've made a point of highlighting them on the lower left. So, as I've said, these have to be occurring. So you see at the top that the water dominant occurred from 1425 to 1723, fire dominant from 1723 to 1921, earth dominant 1921 to 2199, and air from 2199 to 2398. So we've got our fairly neat 1,000-year period. Now notice the red arrows in there show you the red lines.
Right.
Show you when you got the mutation period, as I described earlier. When you've got an influence that's going back and forth. The sun is a little bit like Chidradasha, not quite the next thing and not quite finished with the old. And we notice for also the triple conjunctions. Notice the triple conjunctions don't occur in this 1,000-year period. Usually they don't occur for another 257 years, except in the 20th century, when they occurred twice in one century within 40 years of each other. This, in my estimation, accounts for a lot of the acceleration and intensity of the 20th century. I have a lecture I gave at Seattle 2014. It's on my web store. The title is something like Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, but I have a lot of slides about the statistics of things that happened in that period of time. For instance, if you take one of them, I'm recalling, I'm not looking at it right now, but I'm recalling that by 1804, the population of the world was at 1 billion with a B. And by 1927, it was at, if I'm remembering these numbers right, I think I do, it had gone to 2 billion.
Wow. Now,
since 1927, we're not quite, we're 90 years from there. 2 billion to now 7.5 billion.
Yeah.
So almost quadrupled
Yeah.
the population of the Earth that it took until, for what, prehistory up to 1804 just to reach 1 billion.
Yeah.
And yet in 90 years, we've quadrupled 2 billion. So what's happened? You know, you can ask yourself that, and of course, all kinds of degradation to the environment and so forth. So let's take it back a little bit, and then we're going to zero in on the Earth dominant period, and what has this got to do with elections? Well, if we had an election, we're going back in water dominant period, probably wouldn't have too many elections, come to think, because you had mostly royalty in charge in that period of time. Water, you had mostly sea voyages. You had the most powerful nations had navies, didn't they? So that was the major element. You had, if you went on a sea voyage and you conquered another territory, it was for the king or queen or for that religion, which was usually Christendom, you know, Christianity or Islam. Usually, that's what that was for. So that's that's in a nutshell what we can look at in the water dominant period. And the fire dominant period, so that's when Jupiter, water and fire, Jupiter is going to do better. Mm-hmm. And so you have the most number of nation states being formed. In fact, I've gone so far in my Corporate Conglomerates article of 2010 to say that for the most part, nation states legally formed after 1961 have not done as well. Now, why is that? Because you don't have the fire of patriotism. Remember all that. Now think back to that list of Jupiter. All of the things that make a cohesive unit of a nation, because people all want the same thing, usually independence from a colonial master. Mm-hmm. Or, yeah, that's a very common one. Or they feel allegiance to some common cause. In America, for what became the United States, a lot of people were fleeing persecution of religion, so they wanted.
So you're saying these conjunctions create the overall atmosphere of how nations' destiny unfolds.
Well, yes, and what I'm saying, because I'm looking at the very larger picture here, I'm saying that in the fire dominant period, remind me, I want to take it back to something, that in the fire dominant period, this was a much more ripe time for a nation to form, because you had the fires of patriotism, the people wanted to form a nation.
Okay.
And so, for instance, look at that. I happen to know there was a fire conjunction in November of, you see the end of the water to fire mutation period there, mm-hmm. runs just 80 years up to 1782. So in November of 1782, you had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in fire at 718 of Sagittarius. So not far from the galactic center in Mula. And not far from the ascendant of the USA chart that many of us use, which is the James Kelleher chart. Yes. at actually the ascendant, it's 6:30 p.m., July 4th, 1776. Now, okay, this is the point I want to make, because we are talking about U.S. elections. Right. That November 1782 conjunction, remember that we're all talking like U.S. was formed, it was off and away in 1776. No, the American Revolutionary War was still going on, mm-hmm. and we were still not independent from England. And not only that, but since the water to fire mutation period was still happening, there was, and this is statistically accurate, I've researched this, at least 20% of the American population mm-hmm. were loyalists. They did not want to declare independence from Britain. They wanted the King George III. So, in fact, many of them were what they call repatriated. Many of them were helped out of the country. There were at least 100,000 or more that were repatriated to either Canada, England, some of the Caribbean islands is part of history that many Americans don't even know.
Okay.
But looking at this graph, it shows you that this and in February of 1783, King George III declared the end of hostilities.
Okay.
And just a couple months later, and it took another 7 years before we had our first president. So I'm just saying that the fire dominant period, yes, it began in 1723, but the end of the mutation period was what was needed for that to really take off. And that's the other, so I want to go quickly now to the earth dominant period and point out that yes, you have yes, it did begin in 1921 with a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Virgo, but then that was followed by the triple fire conjunctions in Aries. And that's what I call the beginning of the atomic age. That's when the atom bomb was first detonated and used. And then you had 40 years later, you had what I call the information age really taking off with the triple conjunction in Virgo ruled by Mercury. And so this, you can make up the rules, but the rules have to make sense and they have to work. Yeah. But what I have said is that the dominant period begins when you have at least 2 Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in a row that are in that element. Okay, so you had 61, 81, you had the triple conjunctions in 81. So that's, I think that's, obviously you could spend a lot of time on this chart, but that kind of gets us going to realize that you've got a powerful earth period here, starting especially in 61. I'll draw your attention to I think many of your viewers may be familiar with this, the farewell speech of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who of course had been a general in the World War II. And he gave a farewell speech, I think the date even was January 17th of 1961. So literally a month before that conjunction and 3 days before the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. And in that speech, he used the expression, the military-industrial complex. And he warned against its prevalence and its ability to govern, to dictate foreign policy and dictate way too much in the American electorate and the American future. And he was, of course, as it turned out, exactly right. So that has a lot to do with our current elections, because we are formed by the atomic age with the fire conjunctions leading into and fueled. The information age was fueled by the atomic age. All the internet, so much of that exploration of the internet, computers, all of that was funded by military funding. And so it's inextricably linked. Let's go to the next slide, which is slide 9. Now, both of these slides represent my individual research, my original research. Not that somebody else couldn't find it, but nobody else is using this as far as I know. And this is a 160-year period of time. I call it a 160-year predictive model that is specifically related to the US presidential cycle. I first came across it in the early 2000s when I was disgruntled that I hadn't called the George Bush versus Gore election correctly. I predicted Al Gore, along with actually most of my colleagues had incorrectly predicted that. And so I went back to the drawing board and wanted to look at cycles, because I thought, well, if birth charts could throw you off that much, then I want to look at some cycles and I want to be more attuned to, and we're not saying exactly which ones you should use. I was just looking around to see ones that I could use. So I noticed this pattern that, and I decided, again, I set the criteria and I said, okay, and you'll see on this, in this chart, 28 years of the Saturn cycle is color coded in blue. Ideally it should be dark blue, but they wouldn't show up so well on the slide. Okay, so blue is Saturn, gold is Jupiter. Jupiter is a 12-year cycle, as we've established. And for our purposes of convenience here, Saturn is a 28-year. And notice how it starts in 1940. Again, before that, like 21, it was too far away. It has to be within a couple of months of either the November election, which is the first week of November, or the inauguration, which is January 20th. So it does coincide for these 160 years. And so far, it has worked like clockwork. And so you had, now this wasn't the beginning of the Democrats, but this was Franklin. This is, by the way, not just, we'll talk about Congress, but this is who is in power in the White House. And in the United States, we have a few alternative parties, but it essentially is a duopoly. It's either the Republicans or the Democrats, and that is the way it looks to be for the foreseeable future. Right. I call it a duopoly. So the Democrats were in power already since 1932 in the White House. That was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So he came into his third term in 1940. Very powerful. You notice when they come in, coinciding with the triple conjunctions is very powerful. And they get, what I've noticed is they tend to get deified, whether they deserve it or not. You know, whether they have a reputation that deserves it or not. They tend to get a lot of attention. Actually, any of those 20-year cycles, when they come in any of those. So you notice that 28 years go from 1940 to 68, when the Democrats were in the White House, all with the exception of at the 12-year mark, when that Jupiter orbit was up. There's a point of what I call a point of vulnerability. So in 1952, in came Eisenhower for 8 years. Similarly, in 1980, you have the start of Republicans, and in 1992, in came Bill Clinton for 8 years.
Okay.
The periods in between, the other party is garnering strength, gathering power. So right now, we're kind of in between. But the Democratic Party should gain control again for 28 years in 2020.
Okay.
All right. So then let's go to the next slide. So this is the USA independence chart that I referred to before. It is Jim Kelleher's rectification. Many of us already were using a July 4th chart for 1776. This is for 1830 or 6:30 p.m. on the 24-hour clock, the local mean time for Philadelphia. 8:59 Sagittarius rising with 4 planets in Gemini. Notice how with Virgo at the top of the chart in the 10th house, that you're going to have a lot of power for a president coming in with triple conjunction in Virgo, because that's the 10th house, and it's going to be a Saturn return for the USA chart. So this chart is a marker. It is not a definitive chart for me, but it's always important to look in the background. It's we're in the Rahu Dasha now. That is not pivotal. You'll see this. It's not a pivotal chart in my predictions, but I just wanted to put it in there for reference. Okay, so next slide is the Jupiter-Saturn square chart, slide number 11.
Okay.
I wanted to put one, Sunil, that was before 2016, so you see some other example and see how I work. Now, ideally, you're using a conjunction or an opposition, but we don't have that. Prior to this election, they didn't have that in 76. The square occurs every 20 years, either a waxing or waning square.
So when you say square, it's Kendra to each other, or just Kendra?
Here's how I did it. I did it for the exact moment the square comes in.
Okay.
And set it for Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So it's coming in to the minute.
Okay.
So Jupiter happens to be with Ketu. Jupiter is in Aries at 247 of Aries, and Saturn is retrograde at 247 of Cancer. Okay. So they are in Chara signs. Now, what I did, the way that I worked this chart, was use it a bit like a prashna. And so I looked at, is the 10th Lord, which would be Venus here, right? The ascendant is Leo. And the 10th Lord would be Venus. So where is Venus? Venus is in the 7th house. So good. It's placed angularly, but it's kind of weak, isn't it? Because it's at 008 of Aquarius. So then we go, what is the 10th house from Venus, from the 10th Lord? The 10th Lord says, who is president right now? And the 10th, from the 10th Lord, is who is the next president.
Okay.
So that's how I did this chart.
Okay.
So the 10th Lord would be Venus, and where is Venus? Venus is in Aquarius.
Yeah.
And the 10th Lord from Venus would be what? Would be Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. So what is the status of each of these, and what house do they reside in the chart that has a Leo ascendant? So you see that Venus is at 08 Aquarius. So it's kind of weak in that very early degree. It's in Dhanishta Nakshatra, ruled by Mars. And that's another thing that I learned from Chakrapani, or from the Nadi Jyotisha technique, is the Nakshatra Lord is as important, if not sometimes more important, than the sign Lord. So notice that Mars rules over that Venus. And Mars, meanwhile, is in its own nakshatra of Mrigashira. It's in, Mercury is not a friend to Mars, but it's in its own nakshatra, in the 11th house, which is a great house for a malefic. So you'd say here that the next president looks to be stronger than the current president, wouldn't you?
Okay.
Right? Just from that. And sure enough, so this was the year that Gerald Ford was up for re-election. And Jimmy Carter absolutely knew, he owned a peanut farm in Georgia. Nobody knew. In fact, one headline read, Jimmy who is running for what? It was like nobody knew who he was. And meanwhile, Gerald Ford was a kind of weak incumbent because he had never really been elected. He was replaced, if you recall. Nixon was nearly impeached. He resigned, and his vice president also was forced to resign. That was Spiro Agnew. So here you have a really weak vice president. And in fact, of course, the incumbent did not hold. The new party, the Democratic Party, took over the White House in '76. Now, you'll see when I come to the next chart, but also because I studied this is true for a 140-year period, starting from 1876, that you notice Jupiter and Saturn here are in Chara signs. There's some movement. And when they're in fixed signs, the incumbent or the incumbent party tends to stay in office. But in this case, they're not. This is what I found since 1876.
Could you repeat that, please? Please, if you could repeat that.
Yes. When Jupiter and Saturn now there's 2 Jupiter-Saturn squares in I'm sorry, I'm already skipping ahead to 2016. So there were two Jupiter-Saturn squares in 2016. This year, I think it was the only Jupiter-Saturn square. So I can't say, but basically we say that if that Jupiter and Saturn, each of them are in fixed signs, then what I found for the last 140 years, it falls out in 1856. But the last 140 years, if you research it, and I do have an article on this in March of 2016, the principle is that the incumbent party and or the incumbent party's candidate tends to win the White House. Or I shouldn't say tends to, has won the White House.
Okay.
440 years. So notice we go to the next slide. So I just wanted to give you an example of one where the incumbent did not hold. Notice for a lot of reasons that I cite. They're not, also, okay, Jupiter is in a trinal house, but Saturn's in the 12th house. And Venus and Mars are not. Venus is angular, but isn't particularly strong, is owned by the Nakshatra Lord Mars.
Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Right?
Which particular slide are you talking about?
I'm sorry. I'm still going back over the 1976 chart.
1976. Okay.
Yeah. So why the Venus, you could say, yes, Jupiter, Saturn, etc. They're not, you could just look at it and say, they're not in fixed signs. So, so Gerald Ford does not win. You could just do that. But if you want to get a little further details, you could say, well, this incumbent is very weak. He's visible, right? Seventh house is visible. He's visible for sure. He's president. He's sitting president. But he's weak, right? He's weak. All right, so now we are moving to the next slide, which is the most recent Jupiter-Saturn square. This is slide number 12. So we see that in this case, for the second square of 2016, you've got 7 planets in fixed signs. So that's pretty definitive, isn't it? You could just turn away and say, okay, we've got it. The Democrats are going to take the White House. Obama can't run anymore because he's done his 8 years, but it will be whatever Democrat. Okay, so back in December of 2015, I predicted, and we'll get to Trump, I predicted that Trump would be the nominee for the Republican Party and that the Democrats would take the White House. Now, I predicted that there would be, excuse me, I need to get a tissue here.
No worries. It's very interesting discussion. It's lovely to see your methods. Yeah, very lovely.
Okay.
This square method is so interesting. This Jupiter-Saturn square, angular to each other. Very interesting. Fantastic.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting, and particularly when it delivers. When it delivers. And you see this one with a Taurus ascendant and 7 planets in the angles, all in fixed signs. So this is the second, and I usually do it if there are 2, or for that matter 3, or however many squares. I like to look at the last one for the year that will be prior to the election. And this one was May 26th. And so I looked at the same thing that I did with it. So I just wanted to start you out with one other one. So you see, okay, so where is the 10th house? And that is the current president. So it's Taurus ascendant, 10th house is Aquarius, ruled by Saturn. So Saturn is Digbala, isn't it? It's located in the 7th house, retrograde with Mars in Scorpio. So it's very strong. And what is the 10th from Saturn? Well, it's Leo, and Jupiter and Rahu are there. And the Sun, which is the Lord of Leo, of course, is opposite Saturn. And guess who are planetary enemies? The Sun and Saturn. So what I said all along was there's going to be some major dissension here in the Democratic Party, even though I expect them to win the White House. There's some problems here. And I did predict, and I'll just say it out, I did predict that the insurgent candidate would win, and that candidate was Bernie Sanders. And actually, and here's where the controversy begins, and some people are talking about it and some people are not. And that is that a lot of election vote fraud experts and lawyers are saying that Bernie won by a large margin, and in fact won over 12 states that were awarded to Hillary Clinton. So that's pretty controversial because that makes her essentially now the illegitimate candidate. But this is not being discussed anywhere. The corporate media, who, again, the corporate media, I mean, just listen to that. Corporate media, that's Saturn having a large influence over the journalists. So the journalists are supposed to report the news, but if they've got a big thumb on them from the corporations, they will report and write and speak what the corporations want them to write, speak, and deliver. Okay, this is essentially the way, and you've got Rahu with Jupiter, so there's maybe some amplifying all of this. So this is I mean, I've written about this almost every article that I wrote about the election is media, the media as well, because people tend to think, oh, they're 100. In fact, I even saw some article by New York Times or Washington Post. Sorry, I can't. It's written up somewhere in one of my articles, so I can't cite the exact person, but pretty established journalists saying, you know, people, they should stop complaining about the media. There are hundreds of media. You know, it isn't just a few of us. There's hundreds and hundreds of us. Well, wrong, because one of the things that the Republicans did, and Reagan worked towards this especially, was to deregulate corporations and to create fewer and fewer companies. So it made it more and more possible for companies to buy up other companies and become conglomerates.
Oh.
So instead of having hundreds and hundreds of and thousands of media organizations as you had back in the 50s, by 1983 there were exactly 53 major media organizations. And now, 2016 and even a few years ago, there are exactly six that own 90% of the media. So very big opportunity to control the message. So that's a big story. It's a big story. It's a major part of
so
the election.
that's your Jupiter Rahu playing it out, is it?
Yes, I think so. And as we've seen with these quote hacked emails, and you notice when the journalists, and they kind of say, with whistleblowers, they are the quote regulators of last resort. I'm quoting a whistleblower actually from England. But you notice that if journalists are not doing their job, or the proper job of journalists, then along come what? The hackers. Somebody that are going to reveal what nobody else will because they're not doing their job. I mean, that's kind of the way I see it. Yeah. I mean, in a way, they shouldn't be hacking. I mean, you would say, well, that's an infraction of privacy, but then that's what's being done all the time to the citizens.
Quick question. Speaking on the same subject, there was some controversy, scandal around Hillary Clinton's emails. When did that start? Which month?
Controversies around what?
Hillary Clinton's emails.
Oh, yes. Well, right. Well, that really was way back in I'm back in the 20th century.
Recently,
that was actually they were after her for that back in 2015. So even at the beginning of her campaign, and she declared in March, I think it was March of 2015, that was already kind of dogging her then, but they were trying to keep it quiet.
Okay.
And she's basically had the cooperation of the FBI. I mean,
okay.
It's all been So that's been happening the whole time.
Jupiter. I was just trying to figure out this conjunction of Jupiter Rahu.
Yes, and that would have come in, and I have those dates when they came in exact, but I think it was actually January. And of course, you could use, now what are you going to use, true node or mean node? But if you used whichever one, I think it was around early January of 2016 that you had your first fusion there, mingling of the Jupiter Rahu, which in certain ways, and of course the independent media has played a big role, but in the end, there's a lot of control that corporate media has, a lot of control. So you might think from this that the independent media would win out. So we can go back to any of these, but I think we'll move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so this, you can see, so this square chart was pivotal to my predicting the correct party. Okay, so now I'm going to do a series of inauguration charts, and you'll see I could not resist putting in 1945, and you'll see why in a minute. Now, most of these inauguration charts, they're pretty easy to follow because most of them are going to have Aries ascendant and Capricorn 10th house. Now, the reason why January 20th, this is Saturday, 1945 does not have that is because they're in wartime. Wartime. And of course, this is the fourth term of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
So when you're saying an inauguration chart, Edith, when you're saying an inauguration chart, just for the audience, it's the day the president.
Right. Now we spoke of this much earlier, but basically, we spoke about this when I said I prefer the inauguration chart for the U.S. election, presidential election, to the elections because it's always on January 20th, unless the 20th of January falls on a Sunday. And this goes way back because Inauguration Day used to be March 4th. It used to be much later in the year. And so, and even then, so they'd push it to the 5th. So there's something about, it's funny because astrologically, I mean, not funny, but it's odd astrologically because the sun is the karaka for leader for president. So why not a Sunday? But, you know, maybe it was for the religious reasons. You know,
Okay.
they wanted.
So you're saying this is the chart many US astrologers use and you prefer to predict who's going to be in office on that date. Am I right?
Well, yes, you're going to see how many things fall into place.
Okay.
Especially when you look historically, you see, now you're going to see that I am looking at the vice president. Now, you know your planetary cabinet, right?
Okay.
In the planetary cabinet, there are two advisors to the king. The king and the queen are sun and moon.
Right.
And the advisors are Venus and Jupiter. Now, Jupiter, I call the vice president.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I use in these charts. So you can see, well, is it harmonious to the president? Is it supportive? Is it in a trine? Because a classical aspect, of course, Jupiter. I don't happen to use the trine of Rahu. So the only planet I consider can do a trinal aspect is Jupiter. So you see, there's a very nice trine here. In fact, any time for this chart, because we know Saturn's going to be in Capricorn, right around 7 Capricorn at the top of this chart. And anytime Jupiter is in an earth sign, is going to aspect Sun in Capricorn. So it's going to be nicely supportive. But we have different versions of this story. So even though I'm going to show you a bunch of inauguration charts, you kind of have the same theme. Now, what's different about this is because it's wartime, it pushes it back to Vargotama 2745 Pisces ascendant. I'm not saying a lot about the Navamsha charts, and I just kept it all South Indian. So I'm pardon to those who use North Indian. For my most recent lecture, I had a lot of audience that were Western tropicalists, so I wanted to keep the slides pretty simple. So we've got all South Indian here, and you see that the Karaka for the Sun is always the president, and instead of being in the 10th house for the Aries ascendant, where it normally would be, it's in the 11th house, which isn't as strong. It's a nice house for the Sun. It's okay for a malefic to be in Upachaya house. That's nice. But it's not as powerful as the 10th, where it's Digbala. So you see this. So to give you a little mini history lesson here. So this was the 4th term of Roosevelt, and he was very ill, very fragile. His heart was in terrible shape. People who saw him, and of course not many people saw him because they kept him hidden away. Not just because he was a polio victim, and many people didn't even know he was in a wheelchair most of the time. So, but notice how this is wartime, and notice the Mars Mercury Ketu at the top of the chart opposite Saturn Rahu. I mean, this is a very fierce wartime chart. But back to the excuse me, the vice president. Very powerful. He hardly knew Harry Truman. Hardly knew him. But his advisors said, we need a strong vice president because, quite frankly, they didn't expect FDR to last very long, and he didn't. He only lived another 2 months. He died in early April of 1945.
Oh.
Yeah, he was very ill. He was very, he was, he died of a stroke. I think I read somewhere his blood pressure as of about January of 45 was something like 180 over 110. It's something ridiculous. Could have a stroke at any moment. So he was very, very fragile. So they scurried around. A lot of people did not want the current vice president. I think his name was Henry Wallace. He was not that popular with the party. So they scurried around and got somebody they thought was conscientious, honest, and hardworking, and that was Harry Truman. And Roosevelt hardly knew him at all. So notice he's over there in the 7th house. He's angular. Jupiter is angular, and Jupiter rules the 10th house in this chart. So Jupiter really has more power than this president. So you'd say that, I haven't done a whole study of his opposition and so forth. Yeah, I think he won handily this. But you would, if you were back in 1945 and you were using this chart, you would say, well, whoever it is going to has a very powerful vice president.
Okay. And he becomes the center stage after.
Oh yeah, in 2 months. And he's the one who makes the fateful decision.
So it makes sense, Jupiter being the vice president. It makes sense.
Absolutely.
With this
and
chart,
you'll see.
it's crystal clear.
I'm sorry?
with this horoscope, inauguration chart, it's crystal clear the vice president's going to take over.
Yes. Yes. And notice I haven't timed it per se. It's just this president is not going to last very long. We already know he's fragile. He's already pushed over into the 11th house somehow. Okay, so now you'll see that I'm kind of building on this. The more charts you'll see, the more you'll get the sense of this. So now we're into the charts that we're going to see more. Okay, this is the Aries ascendant. We're out of wartime. It's Eastern Standard Time. Washington, D.C. We set it for the Capitol building, Washington, D.C. It's taken place various places, but usually they're somewhere around the Capitol building. This was a Friday, January 20th, 1961. So the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. Now, again, look at, so Sun in the 10th house, very good. And now he was running against Nixon. And Nixon, so you could say, again, I'm going to draw your attention to the vice president. Kennedy's vice president was Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was very powerful in Congress. Okay, he was not his first choice. He was a little too powerful. In fact, Johnson ran for president as well and was beaten out in the primaries by Kennedy. And, you know, he considered Kennedy wasn't even a worthy opponent. He was young, inexperienced, all that, you know, of course, they figured his Catholicism would be a problem. But notice, again, how strong Jupiter is here. Jupiter is up in the 9th house, forming a Raja Yoga with the Lord of the 10th. So we got a nice Raja Yoga. Now, there's some texts that say for an Aries ascendant, Jupiter, Saturn can't form it. But I think for this chart, we have to say, wow, that's a pretty powerful vice president. Yeah. And for his opponent, his opponent was Richard Nixon. Nixon's vice president was a man from Massachusetts, like Kennedy, whom Kennedy had beaten in 1952 in a Senate race. His name was Henry Cabot Lodge. Came from a very distinguished Massachusetts family. But he was much weaker. He didn't have the strength that Johnson was pretty much of a powerhouse in Congress. And many people expected that he didn't even come into the primaries until about July. You know, things worked much slower then. So just based, you know, I'm just kind of shortcutting here, just based on that. And of course, if we were looking ahead, we see, look at that moon over there. The moon is at 2958 degrees Aquarius. So 2 minutes away from going into the 12th house. Might say the 12th house of loss and separation. This was a president who, when he was assassinated, you know, a couple of years into his presidency, was greatly mourned by a lot of people. So you could say a lot of that is already being laid out. Now, I'll draw your attention to something else that I discovered in these inauguration charts, is that how Jupiter and Saturn are interacting show you how the houses of Congress, how the two parties, the two major parties, Republicans and Democrats, are going to interact. Will they be harmonious? Okay. Will they be in conflict? Well, you know, they're in conjunction for several years here. The Democrats pretty much dominated both houses of Congress, and Lyndon Baines Johnson was one of the presidents, along with FDR, who got the most legislation, more legislation through Congress than just about any president in history. Okay, so FDR and Johnson. So you can see that was working very well to have both of those. Now, as soon as they put the Civil Rights Bill through, that kind of threw, as he said at the time, there goes the South, and the South became Republican after that. But you get oh, and notice, by the way, we know that Mars can aspect the 4th, 7th, and 8th house from itself. So notice that Mars retrograde in Gemini. Notice that it aspects the Sun with an 8th house aspect. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So that when you have a Mars aspect to the Sun, there is some possible danger, physical danger to that president. So, and as we know, Kennedy was assassinated.
That too while traveling. While traveling.
Yeah, I'm sorry? While traveling, yeah.
That's Mars in the 3rd house.
Right, and of course Johnson was with him. He's a Texan. He was there too.
Okay.
along with it, you know. So in a way, many things are shown in
Showing
this
up.
chart,
Yeah.
looking ahead. Okay, so now 1981. So this was Ronald Reagan. And we noticed that this is a pretty powerful inauguration in the sense that we're at the 20-year mark, a triple conjunction. Notice that Jupiter-Saturn is in Graha Yuddha. Okay, it's within 1 degree. So Jupiter loses to Saturn. Jupiter is the vice president. So Reagan, and this is such an interesting story. So Reagan is pretty powerful here. You got a full moon. There's also an eclipse, I believe, that happened very close to this several hours earlier. I've got that in some. I'll be writing about this in an article at the end of this month. So yeah, this day was pretty fraught in certain ways, and of course, as we know, there was an assassination attempt on him. He was shot at. Probably suffered a lot from that. And some people say he was never quite the same and went downhill physically, but he did maintain, he was in power for 8 years. Now notice that Sun, Ketu, Mercury, Mars are all in the 10th house. The Jupiter, very nice to have Jupiter in an earth sign. It is aspecting the Sun, so that's nice. So Ronald Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter there.
Okay.
But the thing is that's you have to have a president who has a very weak vice president.
Okay.
And this is one of the things. And we see, of course, Ronald Reagan was known as this major kind of media figure. So that kind of shows there with the, he was known as a GE spokesman, General Electric, and all of that. So he was kind of known in that way. But notice at the very last minute, actually, Gerald Ford was in negotiation with him, the previous president, to be vice president. And those negotiations were in the works for weeks and only fell apart the night that he was supposed to announce the vice president at the Republican National Convention. And that night, he called somebody. He said, "Well, who else do we have?" And somebody suggested George H.W. Bush, the father of George Bush. At the last minute, literally, I've read up on this. At about midnight, he was supposed to go out on the stage of the convention and announce his vice president. 11:38 p.m., he calls somebody has his phone number. He calls George H.W. Bush and very pleasantly, charmingly asks him if he will agree with his platform and a few other, pleasantries. And he says, yes, he will. And so, voila, George H.W. Bush is suddenly they called him, in a way, the accidental vice president. He had very little power. And so you see that because Jupiter is losing the planetary war and Jupiter is the vice president. Okay, so there's that chart. All right, let's go to the 2001 chart, and we'll just quickly flip through that. And you see this is, of course, a contested election, a very bitter election. This is when George W. Bush was kind of anointed by the U.S. Supreme Court. So notice the public is the moon. Moon is in Scorpio with this chart, always. Well, 8th house is going to be Scorpio, I should say. So if the moon is in the 8th house, the public is not happy. Okay, the public is not happy in some way. It's also in a Papakartra yoga. Feels hemmed in by the choice. Mars aspects the sun. Notice Mars. So there is some potential physical danger to this president. Notice the strength. Again, this is the strength of the vice president. His vice president was Dick Cheney, who was the powerhouse in that administration.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful down there, not below the horizon, so you can't see. So he's down there, conjunct Saturn by 7 degrees. So this was just out from the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in late May. So again, when you have the conjunction, the opposition, but particularly the conjunction or sextile trine, you've got, chances are you can push things through Congress. So you have that as well. Okay. So 2009, this is the last of that bunch of inauguration charts. So we're looking at slide number 17. So notice, and this was a chart that I used to predict Barack Obama in
Okay.
2008. I did predict that in February of 08, 10 months before. It was one of the charts I used. But at the time, you also had it was John McCain and Sarah Palin. And here, so that was, you could say, well, which one of these pairs does it fit? Well, it fits somebody, first of all, who's very eloquent. Now, why do I say that? Because the sun, notice the sun and Mercury are 6 minutes apart. So this Mercury, very, very close to the sun, Western astrologers call that Kazemi. It's so close that it gets very illuminated and can be very brilliant. So I said, hey, this president has to be a very fine speaker, a very eloquent speaker. And indeed, Barack Obama is known for that. Also, I said, look how close this Jupiter is to the sun, within 3 degrees. This vice president will be very close to this president. Okay? And indeed, Joe Biden is closer to this president than, who knows, maybe any vice president in history. I mean, the families take vacation together. They're very, very close personally. And he's been a close personal advisor. So that, to me, that spelled to me Obama and Biden. It did not spell to me that it would be McCain and Sarah Palin. Notice also, and you'll see this in both inauguration charts for Obama, that, and I don't know if we're showing both of them here. No, I'm not going to show the next one. But for both of them, you see that Jupiter, Saturn are in a 6/8 house relationship.
Right.
And this shows, maybe your viewers from India and elsewhere know, there's been tremendous blockage in Congress.
Right.
Very difficult to get any laws passed, anything passed. And the Republicans made it a policy to block as much as they possibly could from Obama. So that you can often see with the 6/8, which of course Westerners call, Western tropicalists call quincunx. So a 6/8, the way I see it is typically you don't have much cooperation between the two parties in Congress. So that president is very impeded. All right. So next, I wanted to look, because it's, what do you, now going back to birth charts, I mean, that showed us an awful lot, right? You didn't even have to use a birth chart.
Yeah. Inauguration chart is fantastic.
Good. Glad you like that, because, you know, quite frankly, you can, as you'll see when I show some of these charts, and, you know, I mean, Kennedy and Nixon, they were 2 points apart, 0.2. I mean, it was such a close election, and many say it was stolen. So how do you read this? So you read, okay, so you're looking at several things: the strength of the 10th lord, the strength of the ascendant lord. And with the Leo ascendant for Nixon, his birth data, by the way, Thursday, January 9th, 1913, 21:35 or 9:35 p.m., Yorba Linda, California. So you see that he does have 4 planets in the 5th house, Sun and Jupiter close together. Notice he has a planetary war between Mercury and Mars, and this is a point which I have found to be true most of the time in my work, that Mars, planet of war. So ironic. Mars always loses the planetary war because it's for all kinds of reasons I state. So, you know, you need Mars. I mean, and it loses badly. So it tends to kick up quite a fuss. So, you know, but now look at his Dasha Bhukti, for instance, and he was in Saturn. Sorry, I couldn't put the Dasha on here, but he was in Saturn Dasha, Venus Bhukti. And notice they're angular. So, I mean, Nixon lost this election. It looks very good, doesn't it? Well, it doesn't. I mean, at least it looks good in the, and Saturn is angular in both the birth chart and the Rashi chart. Venus, but Venus is not angular. Venus goes to the 3rd house in the Vamsha chart. But the Dasha Bhukti looks good, Saturn, Venus. So that, you know, that's a good, that would be a good estimation that Nixon would have a good chance. It turned out that he did 2 years later win the governorship of California. In 1968, he became president in another election. But this year he lost. Now, what about Kennedy?
Okay.
Notice Kennedy, okay, born May 29, 1917, 3 o'clock p.m., Brookline, Massachusetts. Vargotama, Virgo rising. This chart, much stronger from the moon. You get the Jupiter, Sun, Venus in the 10th house. But reading from the Virgo ascendant, I mean, the 10th Lord, as well as the ascendant Lord, is in the 8th, which tells a lot of the story. I do cover Kennedy at some length in my book, In Search of Destiny. In fact, several Kennedys, Bobby Kennedy, Jackie, and John.
Okay.
But, I mean, 10th Lord in the 8th, this is like career loss, isn't it? I mean, it's not... Yeah. If you were just looking at this and looking at Nixon and you see, oh, Kennedy is in Rahu Mars Dasha, that's where Trump is now. Now, he wasn't as far along in it. You might say, oh, well, it looks like Nixon has a better chance. I mean, you look at more, obviously. I'm kind of just giving you the you know, the larger scope of things. We're looking in the usual houses, the strength of the ascendant Lord, the strength of the sun as Karaka for leadership. And of course, he had terrible health, but most people didn't know it. It's in the 8th house, where the 8th house was secrets. So it was kept from the public, and it was also, I mean, the 8th Lord conjunct the ascendant Lord. Well, this is not a good yoga for health. So, which has been much studied. But you see from the moon, it's a much stronger chart. Right. So, yeah. So then we'll quickly just show that inauguration chart. And you'd say, again, you'd have to, I put a lot of dependence on, well, who's the vice president? Who's got the strongest vice president?
Okay.
Because that's, and that is Kennedy. Okay, so this is a quick look through that. Now, let us move to the chart of Al Gore, moving up to 2000. And both he and George W. Bush have the Cancer ascendant. And Gore was in Rahu Mercury Dasha. He's born March 31, 1948 at 12:53 p.m., Washington, D.C. Senate Lord in the 6th, not that happy. It is with Jupiter, but not a great placement for a fighter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to have to contest something, which indeed this was probably the biggest contest of his lifetime that most people know of. He's had other other things he's done, with climate change and all that.
Yeah.
But so that kind of tells a big picture there. But the 10th Lord, who's got Rahu in the 10th, that's pretty good. But Mars in the ascendant with Saturn. But the thing with, now quickly look at George W. Bush, who was announced as the winner. But again, that was because that was a 20-year election. If we go back in your mind now to the graphs I showed, that is an election year. Notice that would be when the Republicans were not quite finished yet. They still had till 2008. But it's a year that's often very dicey in terms of people questioning the vote. So both of them with Cancer ascendant, Saturn in the ascendant for both of them. And Moon is better placed for George Bush, but and the Sun is well placed from his in the Rashi chart. The Sun is in the 10th house from the Moon. Same with Kennedy, by the way. Had the Sun in the 10th house from the Moon. So that is very good. That's a mini indication right there. But still, for many of us did not predict George W. Bush. Now, I point your attention to the right, to the Navamsha chart.
Okay.
I don't know how we missed this, because look at that 10th house. So it's got Scorpio ascendant with Leo 10th house, Saturn, Mars, Moon, Rahu, Jupiter, and he was in Saturn, Mars, Dasha.
Oh.
I mean, absolutely bang. Why would you not see that? But most of us did not.
And he would go to war. He would go to war if he got elected.
Yes. And it's clearer there. Well, there is Mars in the inauguration chart, which I do have next. Once again, repeated. You do have Mars. So slide number...
Yeah, I got it. 2001.
Okay.
Inauguration 2001.
Right. So you see that Mars is repeated angularly in the inauguration chart. But I think that Navamsha chart of his, you put that together with the inauguration chart, and you say there's no way that and there's going to be some controversy.
Counting was the issue, right? Wasn't this the election the counting became issue? Counting of votes?
Oh yes. And not only they were supposed to do, and let's take it back a step. Al Gore won more votes than Bush.
Yes.
But because of this strange thing we've got called the Electoral College, you have to win certain states in order to have more Electoral College votes. So he had to win Florida. And when, of course, George Bush's brother, Jeb Bush, was governor there at the time, and they had the registrar, Catherine Harris, was already lined up to make sure that she was doing all kinds of monkey business. It was all shown later, and all kinds of fraudulent things took place, but especially around Florida.
Okay.
And Florida, a recount was requested and was in the works, and it was suddenly canceled by no authority, really. I mean, they had the authority to do a recount, and if they had completed it, Gore would have probably won.
Yeah, but I think before, if I remember well, this was 14 years back. If I remember well, Al Gore did the mistake. He conceded.
Yes, he was too weak. Right? That's right. And if we take this back, take this back to Al Gore's chart.
Yeah, we have it here.
He was in Rahu Mercury.
Oh my God.
Yeah, look at Rahu. Okay, so look at that. So Rahu's in the 10th house, but Mercury's in the 8th house. And it's in the 8th house in both the Rashi and the Navamsha.
Oh.
And look at that. It's well now. Rahu and Mercury are also in 6th, 8th house relationship in the Navamsha. In the Navamsha. Now I have seen people get. I mean, Hillary gets. I mean, she's in Sun Rahu, and Sun Rahu are in 6-8. So it's not impossible. It's not impossible, but you don't like to see. The Bhukti Lord is in the 8th house in both Rashi and Navamsha. And you'd think that Saturn Mars would be stronger, but you see, first Ascendant Lord in the 6th house. So I think you were thinking like I was, weren't you, Sunil? You're thinking, well, what about Al Gore?
Yeah.
What was it about Al Gore that he would concede?
Yeah. And also, Mercury periods, Mercury in the 8th house. 8th house is about darkness. Mercury is your mind, your intellect, and somewhere down the line, the counting, I think he just pure bad luck. I mean, I don't know. Pure bad luck. Pure bad luck for him,
Yeah.
With Mercury being in the 8th house during that.
Well, look at that. It's 12th Lord in the 8th, so it should have been some protection for him. But
I'm still not so convinced about Vipreet Raj Yogs, having great effects.
We know it doesn't. We know it doesn't always protect you, your physical health. Now, in this case, it wasn't to do with physical health, but he did lose. He did lose an election. He should have won.
He should have won.
He should have definitely won.
So, does the inauguration chart show that? Does the inauguration chart show that?
Let's go.
Okay.
The inauguration. So yes, in a way, it does. Because look at his vice president, which was Joe Lieberman, who was from Connecticut. He was a senator, not all that powerful. I can't remember. I think they wanted since Al Gore was from Tennessee, and Lieberman, he wanted somebody from another part of the country. You know the way they have their logic for how they choose. I never thought that was a strong combination. And Lieberman's anyway become a Republican. Since then. So you can see how I'm not saying it's a crime to change parties, but there's a shiftiness there. So you look at this inauguration chart and you see, whoa, that's a powerful vice president. And Lieberman, if you were to assess and compare Dick Cheney to Joe Lieberman,
Hmm.
Dick Cheney had already had, he'd come in, he got power under Ronald Reagan.
Mhm.
And he was more of a kind of background guy who he gained power slowly in the back rooms, so to speak.
Mhm.
So it's perfect. He's below the horizon. He gave, as many people know, he was a powerhouse behind the scenes. And I don't think, if you knew anything about, if I've been using these charts as much as I do now,
Mhm.
I would say, I don't think this looks like Joe Lieberman,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And also, look, this looks like a more of a warlike chart.
Hmm.
And so, and I don't think that Gore was talking about starting wars.
Yeah. Mars is in the 7th house.
Yep, in Libra,
Hmm.
aspecting the sun. So maybe there were threats on the president's life. We've seen this with the aspect of Mars to the sun.
Hmm.
I don't know. He was never harmed. I don't know if there were assassination attempts, but I'm assuming there were. There was a lot of controversy around George W. Bush because a lot of people, look at that moon in the 8th house. A lot of people did not like that election. They were not happy with it.
Yeah.
But and moon was in the 8th house with Obama's inauguration. There are a lot of people that we didn't know. A lot of Republicans were not happy about Obama's election. So, and that's how you have a lot of the people coming out now for Trump.
Yeah.
We understand that more now in retrospect. What we have to respect as astrologers is, moon is the public. It's in the 8th house. It's debilitated in Scorpio. Okay, it gets Nichabanga here. But it means the public is not happy, not completely happy with these results.
Yeah. Can I just ask a question? My memory has not been that great. 9/11, which year it happened?
This was 2001. Oh, yeah. I mean, they were already planning right as soon as they came in office. It's been reported and written that this Bush administration had already ticked off, I think it was 7 countries that they wanted to attack very quickly. This was a very, what they call neocon, interventionist, what they called nation building. They wanted to gain control of the Middle East. Those countries were Iraq, I believe Iran was amongst them, Syria, Libya. I mean, all the countries that have now, are in such bad shape, such huge refugee problems. So yeah, that was their policy. New American Century, they called it. And a lot of this crew, by the way, they call them neocons now. Maybe they got some other name for themselves. They are solidly backing Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
Okay. So now we will finish up with Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. So you can see, I mean, this talk, which I gave recently also at the ISAR conference in Costa Mesa, California, I wanted to give, I mean, I did speak also just about the 2016 election, but I like this perspective because it shows you what is the background against which you look at these candidates.
Right.
What is the period we're in? Because the period we're in the Earth cycle, the corporations have a huge amount of control over what happens. And which of these candidates is going to be favored? So now Donald Trump, a lot has been said about this chart. I don't know how much you want me to go into this, but the Leo ascendant with Mars, okay, birth data is June 14th, born on a Friday. Venus's day, June 14th, 1946 at 10:54 a.m. Queens Village, New York. This chart is not contested. Hillary's is, and I'll show you what birth data I used for her. But in a way, this chart is so definitive. It shows his rise and his fall. I had said there's no other, and I didn't even know all the other candidates. In other words, their charts. There were 17 Republican candidates. This chart was 17. A lot of weak ones, but he competed in that field and beat out 16 other competitors. That is a strong competitor. You got to admit. So Mars rising in Leo with the sun in the 10th. And you've got, I think the sun is also, yes, Atmakaraka. Powerful sun, ascendant lord Atmakaraka. in the 10th with Rahu, very close. Opposite full moon chart, opposite moon, Gandanta Scorpio, very close to Ketu, born within a few hours of a total lunar eclipse.
Mhm.
And this to me says so much about his emotionality, his ability to be pervasive. He has absolutely dominated the stage.
Yeah, very dominant.
Ever since he's come in, literally the day he came in.
Yeah.
He announced his candidacy the day, I think it was the day before his birthday or the day after his birthday. It might have been June 15th
Mhm.
of 2015. And ever since, and he was on his escalator, his all gold plate escalator at the Trump Towers in New York.
Mhm.
Very spectacular, very spectacular. So, I mean, from that moment on, he has just dominated really both Republican and Democratic, the whole scene. And so, and people are saying, well, no, the media created him. Well, the media gave him a lot of free time. They've said over $2 billion worth of free time. You can see that. Leo ascendant, sun in the 10th.
Mhm.
A total lunar eclipse is going to give unbelievable drama, some unpredictability. You've also got a very nice, I mean, this is a Nietzsche Bangaraja yoga. So it gets this moon in Scorpio gets correction. So his home, 4th house, his family, his many beautiful homes. They're in gorgeous locations. They're very palatial, all of that, as you would expect for a billionaire. So he has all of those. He has Jupiter aspecting Jupiter aspecting the sun from Virgo to Sun in Taurus.
Mhm.
So a very powerful chart. Now, the thing is with his timing, again, I don't see how, and there are some Vedic astrologers predicting that he will win.
Mhm.
Yes, believe it or not, but I don't see it. I don't see it's possible because he is in the last couple of months.
Dasha Chidra.
Yes, Dasha Chidra, exactly. He's in Rahu Mars, and much further along in Rahu Mars than John F. Kennedy was.
Mhm.
He will literally move into Jupiter on November 16th, 8 days after, using Lahiri Ayanamsha, 8 days after the election, which is November 8th. Now, some people have said, now again, one of my colleagues on the panel that I was on at the ISAR conference, Christine Skinner, is a foremost British financial astrologer, she said, well, because I'll tell you what I said, and then she disagreed with me. I said, well, I see Trump moving on. I don't see him winning because the last Dasha Bhukti of Rahu is a period of typically of loss and separation. And I said also back in December 2015, I said he has got to go down once Jupiter leaves Leo. Because from Leo, he's got a lot of protection. But once it leaves there, what is he left with there? We've got Rahu in Leo by transit, and you've got Saturn in Scorpio aspecting by its 10th house aspect, aspecting that ascendant. So if anybody amongst your viewers would know, if they've got a Leo ascendant, they were maybe kind of vulnerable as of August 12th of 2016. And he's been in the limelight. He's stayed at the epicenter, but he's been vulnerable.
Yes.
And since then, and he's gone down in the polls. Some people would go down in the polls and they'd sort of disappear out of, but he's so prominent, that Sun Rahu. He's not going to disappear. There's no way he's going to disappear anytime soon. And what I said was that when he enters Jupiter Dasha, this Jupiter, by the way, is almost virtually stationary direct, so it has a lot of power.
Okay.
At birth it was almost stationary direct, so it's well placed. It's a Dana yoga. Dana yoga is a yoga of wealth. The 8th lord in the 2nd, the lord of the 2nd, which is Mercury, is in the 11th, so it's another Dana yoga supporting the first one. And Jupiter is currently, as he enters Jupiter Dasha, Jupiter is in a Jupiter return. So that's fortuitous for financial matters, not necessarily becoming president.
Can you repeat that last point? It is
Yes.
good for?
So ask your question again.
It is good for Jupiter
Oh,
return?
good for financially because Jupiter, it's a Jupiter return. So Jupiter entered Virgo on August 12th using Lahiri Yanamsha. August 12th of 2016. So notice this was just the Democratic National Convention ended shortly after the Republican one, ended on July 28th. Shortly, he had a bit of a rise after the Republican convention ended on the 25th. But ever since then, he's never quite regained ground. And he had several opportunities where he could have. But there have been a number of snafus. Some of them, as people say, are kind of self-inflicted. The Clinton, yet another political dynasty along with the Kennedys. Not as many children, but maybe a lot more power, actually. And they have quite a bit of opposition research that they've done. You might ask, well, why suddenly these women all coming forward in the last couple of weeks before the election? Why not when he announced? Why not several months ago? Why not before he got nominated? But they're all coming out now. So there's a formidable opposition machine here.
No,
And
what do you suggest? What do you think about this Saturn-Venus conjunction in the 12th house?
Well, I think of his, that Venus-Saturn can be he's been involved in many beauty contests. He's, it is true. He's been known to, let's take this apart. Venus does well. It's known that Venus can do well in the 12th house.
Right.
Surprising in a way, because Saturn, of course, can aspect the second. So may not, he has had a lot of expenses. He's declared a lot of bankruptcies, so that's not necessarily that great for the affairs of the second house. The business of beauty, the business of, some people could say the business of sex. He has been in the beauty pageant business. He's run a number of beauty contests. He likes to be around beautiful women. That's no secret. It might show a tendency to, I don't want to speculate on that because it's a matter of.
No, I was speaking from the my point of view. My query was more towards why is this leaks happening now? Why? Astrologically speaking, last 1 month has been very bad on him.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I would say that look at Rahu Mars. Rahu Mars tends to bring you down, doesn't it? And look, his natal planets. Now I'm just looking at the Dasha and Bhukti lords. Now Rahu remains angular. I'm looking at the Navamsha now. Rahu is angular in the Navamsha, but Mars goes to the 12th house in Taurus. So, yes, okay, they're in a trinal relationship, but that Mars is not. Yeah, Mars in the house of secrets. So, I'm not saying that is causing it, but I would say that once that Jupiter in Leo by transit left his ascendant, he's just been so bold and so out there. And then you could say, here's a part where you have to see the power. As I'm looking at this chart, the power of the Clinton machine against any opponent. It basically brought down an opponent who had won, according to many people. Bernie Sanders had a formidable victory over Clinton. And they brought him down.
Okay.
And you see, so so the opposition. So what is the opposition here? Well, Saturn, 7th Lord, you could say the 7th Lord, Saturn's in his 12th. Well, maybe working covertly. One of his responses when she came after him at one of the debates was something about a beauty pageant woman that he had allegedly mistreated. He said, first words out of his mouth were, "How did you get that?" So so Saturn, Lord of the 7th house in the 12th. Maybe secrets to do with his partnership? I must say that's an interesting question that I haven't, it would bear further examination. But what I'd say as the leading factor is that Jupiter left his ascendant. And I did predict that back in December of 2015 that, okay, he's riding high now. He will be the nominee. I couldn't see anyone else being the nominee from the Republican Party. And they fought, you know, that party almost fell apart over this nomination. And then they came together and smoothly went through the nomination. Actually, their nomination, their convention was actually smoother than the Democrats. But then as Jupiter, so that's another indication. Their convention was July 21st through 25th. Unbelievably smooth by comparison to the Democrats, who had a lot of unhappy Bernie supporters who were saying vote fraud, who were trying to make their case known and trying to say a lot of things. And they were silenced, basically.
Edith, if you would see the Nomanj, you see the conjunctions. Just recently it came to me. Saturn, Venus are conjunct in Rashi and also in Nomanj.
Yes.
Sun, Rahu in Rashi and also in Nomanj.
Yep.
Ketu, Moon, you know, all.
In Cancer, and in a way that makes sense in Cancer, doesn't it? Because he loves to build beautiful homes and buildings. I mean, he doesn't just build a utilitarian building. It has to be. It has to serve, you know, he's built a lot of casinos, hotels, palatial, Trump Tower, people in New York, that's where he lives in the penthouse. It's a privilege. People regard it, he makes it, he advertises a privilege to live in a Trump building. So in a way, that's the business of beauty, isn't it? The business of, so.
I mean, if I would ask you finally about this horoscope, Donald Trump, you think he's going to get it or no?
No, absolutely not. In fact, a lot of the drama over Hillary Clinton is no. I've said since December 2015 that he would be the Republican nominee, but he would not make the presidency because he's in Rahu Mars and he's at the tail end of Rahu Mars. Plus, I'll go further and say that Jupiter is not strong enough to get in. Now, it is strong to bring him wealth, phenomenal wealth. That is for sure. But it's not, it should be ideally in either an angular house, which as we know is ruled by Vishnu, or a triangular house ruled by Lakshmi. It should be in one of those two. Now, if he had Jupiter in one of those, in both the Rashi and the Navamsha, but even so, classically, you have to say, what is Rahu Mars? Rahu Mars is stripping away what came before. And it did it with John F. Kennedy, even though he was not as far. He was not as far. So, you know, if we were back in 1960, would we be smart enough to see that he could get elected, but he wouldn't last out a full term? Would we be able to see that? We'd see from the inauguration chart that he had the strongest vice president, so he was likely to go in. And yes, he was likely to be attacked. But what I would say, the answer to, and Hillary Clinton, as you may know, her birth data is disputed. I use a time of 7:56 a.m.
Okay.
Yeah, but I really do feel that the Rahu Mars Dasha does not, it ends November 16th. It does not take him to the presidency. I don't see that. Because of the house position where Jupiter is, and because of the inherent meaning of Rahu Mars.
Okay.
And you see it happening. I mean, you see the Jupiter abandoning his, we say abandoning, you know, going on as planned, transiting Jupiter in Virgo, going on, I mean, now in Virgo.
Yes.
So it looks like a strong, now, Christine Skinner, I should mention, she thought he would go bankrupt. She disagreed with me, but she's using Western astrology.
Okay.
You know, so we'll see who's right. But anyway, so lastly, we're looking at the last couple of charts here. Hillary Clinton, I do use, and this is a chart I've used, definitely before, because I was looking at it a lot in 2008 when I predicted I predicted Obama. In early February, I predicted Obama before he had beaten Hillary Clinton, which, let's face it, was much more of a contest than the contest with John McCain. And it's a strong, I mean, I give her a strong chart with Libra Ascendant, Sun, Venus, Mercury in the Libra Ascendant. Oh, by the way, Sunday, October 26th, 1947, 7:56 a.m., Chicago, Illinois. Her birth data for the for your viewers is, a lot of people consider 8 a.m. or right around there, 8 p.m. Or there's a new time that's kind of come up and been considered. It's 2:18 a.m. Right. I looked at it. I didn't like it. It gives a Leo ascendant. It's only the, well, okay, it gives your some angular planets. It's true. Ra with the 10th, Jupiter Ketu in the 4th, Moon in the 7th. But I didn't like it. I didn't like Bill Clinton, who's, of course, had a huge amount of public life. The 7th Lord going to the 12th, that didn't make any sense to me. Whereas in this case, the 7th Lord is Nichibanga Raja Yoga, perfect. Young man from Hope, a tiny little town in Arkansas. Young man makes good. Nichibanga Raja Yoga, 7th Lord goes to the 10th. Notice that the Gandanta Saturn I put is very close to the 10th house cusp. So there's some treachery here. Notice also, we'll see this in the inauguration chart I'm going to show next. There's Saturn at the inauguration chart is also Gandanta. 7 days before it leaves Scorpio. So there's, you know, and I've said, and again, you won't see this in most corporate news, which is largely outside of Fox and Wall Street Journal, is largely what could be called liberal elite media, which is, let's face it, it's pretty much working for Clinton. So you're not going to say anything about this vote fraud matter. So that is the kind of thing you associate with treachery, because some kind of wool is being pulled over the people's eyes. Like, okay, this is going to happen, and we don't care what you think.
No, but I think yesterday's news, I think Donald Trump says that if Clinton wins, he's not going to accept.
What he said was that he would, I watched that debate, and I've heard him talk a little bit, but he said was that he's going to wait and see. He didn't say he wouldn't accept it, because people are quoting him like, he said that he was going to wait. I mean, he's a player. He plays his cards. And he basically, his exact words were something like, well, will you accept, saying, if I win, I won't question the results. I think he said that today. But he said, if she's declared the winner, I'm going to wait and see how I respond to those results, because he's got to know the amount of, I mean, he can't not know what's gone on in this Democratic primary. He has said at one point, Bernie Sanders wanted to debate him back in late May. It was before all the elections in June, including California. And Donald Trump's very words were, I can't debate Bernie Sanders because, quote, Hillary Clinton and Debbie Wasserman Schultz won't let him win. I mean, sometimes such truth comes out of his mouth. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, for your viewers, was the former head of the DNC, who's also, then she was promoted to be the national campaign chairman for Clinton. So the Democratic National Committee was essentially working as an arm of the Clinton campaign, which is, you can't prosecute them for that, but essentially they should be neutral and allowing any candidate to come forward. They're not supposed to be sabotaging another candidate, which is exactly what they did.
So what does the inauguration horoscope, what do you see?
Yes. Okay.
Ascendant
so then we have,
in the 12th house.
This is a surprisingly good chart. I'm amazed. When I first looked at it, I thought, how could this be reasonably good, given all the controversy, right? And what a Vina yoga chart. So here you have, okay, so Friday, it's on a Friday, so Venus is day. January 20th, 2017, 12 noon as per usual, Washington, D.C. You have planets spread out over all the 7 houses, all the classical planets. Not counting, you technically don't count the, the shadowy planets, Rahu, Ketu. So you got Jupiter in Virgo in the 6th house, Moon in Libra in the 7th, Saturn, 29-24 Scorpio in the 8th, Mercury in Sagittarius, Sun in Capricorn, Ketu, Venus in Aquarius, Mars lastly at 0-16 Pisces. And so several things I see. Notice the moon's in a better house than the 8th, so the public is more reasonably pleased with this election. Not in the 8th house, so that's a good sign that things might be somewhat smooth. Notice that the vice president, which is Jupiter, is in an earth sign, so that's good for the president, gets support. It's a reasonably strong Jupiter, Vargotama in Virgo. It's in a sextile. Now this is, we have to look at as a Tajika aspect because it's normally Jupiter doesn't sextile. But I see it as a harmonious, notice they're almost exactly, by degree in 60 degrees sextile aspect from the 6th to the 8th. This to me says this president can get something done in Congress.
Okay.
Now, will it be because more Democrats will get elected or more Republicans are supporting Clinton, so she'll get more done because they're really, they've got somebody they can work with. That is not what Paul Ryan is saying at the moment, but maybe they'll work with her. That's what that indicates. The most troublesome, so the good part of it is the Vina yoga, which is a very fortunate yoga to have. Any individual who has this, considered very fortunate. Their influence spread out across the world. Similarly, this would be true for this president, this administration. When we look at the 2 things that bother me a little bit, one is that Mars aspecting the moon. So Mars is widely opposite Jupiter, so it's in sign opposition, but if you go by degree, it's 28 degrees wide. But it is opposite Jupiter, and it is aspecting by 8th house covert aspect. It's aspecting the moon. The way I read that is covert, some covert influence. We have a lot of surveillance. We have a lot of militarization of the police. So you have that going on. So that's a little troubling. But so in other words, the public doesn't realize how much military action or militarization there is. Same could be said of the drone wars. It's kind of taking place beyond our, beyond our sight, beyond much, how should we say, accountability. Accountability is out of sight, out of sight. Now the last thing that coincides, again, this Gandanta Saturn, which is akin to her natal Gandanta Saturn in the 10th house. And it, to me, it spells that treachery. There's Lord of the 10th house. So there's something about this president or this presidency that is treacherous, that comes about. So what you see is not exactly what lies underneath.
That's because of the 10th Lord in the 8th?
Yes. Now it's aspecting its own house, but it's also Gandanta.
Okay.
It's going to leave. It's going to leave there in 7 days. So it's, as your students should know, this last 3 degrees 20 minutes of a water sign, excuse me, especially in Scorpio, very treacherous.
Very nice.
So that, but that echoes her birth chart, and that's why I tend to put that Mars Saturn in the 10th house.
Okay.
I mean, you'd have Mercury, Venus in the ascendant. You might think, well, this is a charming person. But it's got all that fire of Mars aspect. It's got the sun with it. So this is not a typically charming person. But she's well-spoken and assertive, aggressive, as one would need to be the first woman president of the United States. So to me, that chart makes sense. And at the conference I was just at, there's still controversy around the birth time. No one has seen the birth certificate as of yet. So not everyone agrees with the Libra ascendant, but probably more people use the 8 a.m. chart. I may be overstating that, but I think a lot of people do like that chart. Have you used any particular chart for Hillary Clinton?
No, I've been so far using the 7:56 a.m. chart, but 15 days back or something, there was this ISAR conference, or 10 days back, they reported it with the 2:14 time.
Right, the 2:18 a.m. chart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just started playing around with it, not had the time to do that, But in
right.
fact,
Well, look. I mean, we have her chart right there. Look, it puts the ascendant in Leo. She should have been a writer or well, she is a world traveler, that's for sure. A lot of aspects to the 9th house. But it just takes so much off the ascendant. I don't know. I don't see her as Leo ascendant person. Also another interesting test is look how it afflicted Trump. We know it has a Leo ascendant. Look how it afflicted him when Jupiter left Leo.
Oh yes.
She rose.
Yeah.
She rose up. Didn't afflict her. So I think that's a nice little test right there.
You got a point there. When Jupiter left, Trump was affected, and he started going down.
Yes. Right around then. It was August 12th.
Yeah.
And not that she had some bumps along the way. Not to say she didn't. She collapsed there on 9/11. Yeah, there's a lot about Clinton we may not know. That's another thing.
Yeah.
That we may be seeing from this inauguration chart.
Yeah.
There have been rumors about her health. Rumors that she's, has shown signs of convulsions, that she has shown signs of Parkinson's, shown signs of people taking a drug for Parkinson's for a long time, because she's, had some serious concussions. She's fallen quite a few times. And falls that, might be beyond the normal. Oh, I just fell going up the steps. She also has some medics that travel. They're always right near her, always. Okay. You might say, well, that's just Secret Service. So anyway, those. And so what was my last? Okay, 2021, I think we're pretty much near the end here. But this, just quickly, the 2021 chart, again, you're right near the inauguration. You're right near the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn. Now, this one is not Vargotama, so it's not quite as powerful, but it's as the one in 61. But notice how close that Saturn is to the Sun. Jupiter, Saturn, Sun, Mercury, all in the 10th house. And I read when the Jupiter, Saturn are together or in a trinal aspect, you can get something done in Congress. So that part is good. You got Moon, Mars, and the Ascendant. I don't know. Got some warlike times here. But it's a powerful 10th house, no question about it. This leader comes in with great authority. Who knows? It could be Clinton continuing. I believe it will be a Democrat because of this. Okay, and this is once again this should be slide 27, which is the presidential. I'm sorry, 28 chart, slide number 28. So this is the presidential election cycle once again, just to have you get a quick look. Like, sure. Okay, we had some years in there where the Democrats were garnering strength. We didn't know exactly from this chart, would they take 2016? Because look at that, 1976, a Democrat came in 76, but still the Republicans were gaining a lot of strength. And I could cite several historical principles there that came up, the building think tanks, you name it, taking over, building all kinds of conservative organizations in the media, in academia, all kinds of places. So now it's the Democrat. And the other thing that's kind of interesting. It's not that they're identical, these two parties, but they're more and more both corporate parties.
Okay.
So one last thing I'll just mention, my book here, In Search of Destiny, Biography, History, and Culture as Told Through Vedic Astrology. So this book is available on Amazon.
Okay.
So that's the end of my...
It's a massive book. You covered how many lagnas in that?
Oh, this one has the first 7 lagnas, as well as a lot of history. In the first chapter is 56 pages on 1,000 years of history, which we've seen. In other words, giving some background information for those water, fire, earth, air periods. Speculating on the air period because we haven't been there yet, but a lot that can be said historically to verify what those principles mean astrologically. And also it includes a timeline, both annotated and unannotated, because I kind of wanted to see it clearly myself without any historical, political commentary. And then I wanted to see it with, oh yeah, when did that occur? The internet, okay, the internet here, World Wide Web came in December 25th, 1990, and various things like this. So cultural, social, a lot of course, political kinds of turning points are on that. But again, this presentation here is going more deeply into the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, their cycles. You can see how the larger ones merge into the smaller ones, how they affect each other, how, in this case, U.S. presidential elections are inextricably affected by where we are in these cycles. You know, this would not be happening in a fire period or water, you know. Yeah. It is very specifically to do with what the Earth period is about. So that's why in the end I figured, okay, the Jupiter-Saturn square chart I read in a certain way. What I should have done also, then I would have had the correct prediction in December of 2015 for the exact person, because I could have stepped away and said, but the Earth cycle dictates that this person be corporate friendly, militaristic friendly, a peace-loving candidate is not going to be the candidate of the United States, unfortunately. I say unfortunately for those of us who would like more, fewer wars and less, because you've got the military budget, 54% of the GDP. It's enormous. You know, more military based. Yeah, it's huge. It's way out. As Eisenhower warned in 1961, it would get way out of control. But that's, and just to finish that thought, you had a candidate in Bernie Sanders who was not exactly anti-militaristic, but he was speaking more softly about, hey, we've got to look more to our infrastructure. We've got to repair things at home. We've got to take care of those less fortunate at home, the poverty-stricken, those who need jobs, etc. He was not talking primarily about starting new wars. Whereas Hillary Clinton is, you know, she's very anti-Russia. She's talking about Syria. She's talking about, I mean, of course, to give politically, she's talking about all these things to give the greater impression, certainly greater than Trump, that she has all this foreign policy experience. So you can understand why she's doing it. But she's also got a track record for being, quite frankly, very hawkish. So that pleases the neocons, that pleases the military industrial complex. And so you look at all of that and you see, Bernie Sanders, and that's why some people are seeing that the real shocker of this election is not, to some people, let's put it that way, or in my opinion, the real shocker is not how many sexual escapades Trump has had, but what has gone on in these primaries. Who really won, and why was it so brazen, and why was this so turned around so that the choice of the people, it's not the choice of the people, it's the choice of the corporations. That's what's happening. Mm-hmm. And that's not what is being expressed by the corporate media, not surprisingly, because they are obedient to their corporate bosses. So if I were on CNN, I wouldn't be allowed to say any of this.
But
So that's what the astrology.
At least we astrologers can say what we see from the horoscope, others are.
Amen. Yes, yes. And quite frankly, if you go back and look at that Jupiter-Saturn square chart, which is a ways back, so I flip back there now, but that Jupiter-Saturn square chart of May 2016 is not that easy to read. You could get, and especially with Bernie Sanders, with huge crowds, I mean, massive rallies, matching Trump, if not exceeding him many times. There were 1.5 million people, they figured, at total in all his rallies. Whereas Hillary Clinton had about 5,000 people at her initial coming out, whatever you call that, launching, and not much thereafter. So, I mean, that's got to tell you something, although some people rationalize and say, well, no, it doesn't matter. But at the same time, you have to see that Bernie Sanders was challenging the corporations. And the way I saw that was that the Jupiter-Saturn square, I saw this as the last chance, last gasp at maybe turning things around before the next. I got 4 Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in Earth in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And next one in Capricorn, then Virgo, and then Taurus, and another in Capricorn. And that's a lot of corporate influence. So you could have read that as I initially did, that this was the last potentially the chance to maybe turn things around. But the trend for the period is too strong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, if you look at the 1,000-year chart,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, you glean that knowledge if you didn't get it in other ways.
Yeah. But I feel this has been such a enormous session where you have shared the base of the cycles, why the cycles are important, how you are using it to see Democrats, Republicans, Then you have shown us the inauguration charts, which is something in India we don't get to do it because we don't know the date,
Ah, yes, you don't have that. Yeah,
we don't know when the Prime Minister will be, taking the oath. It's just announced 2 days before. After the elections are, announced, then after a few days they will just announce this is the date the oath is going to be taken.
Well, think of it this way: it's one of the few things we do know.
But I feel what I've seen, and I'm really going to go down history and study the inauguration charts that you have shown in this slide. And I feel with those inauguration charts, a trend of the events that are going to happen for the next 3-4 years can be so easily seen at times,
Yes.
So easily seen. And at the same time, the beauty is this Jupiter-Saturn square.
Yes.
I'm quite sure Vedic astrologers here in India are not using that. That is something wonderful. Thank you for sharing the complete methodology of your predictive system.
Well, Sunil, I was desperate since I didn't have a conjunction or an opposition. So what else could I use? So I thought, well, I count on, as you can see from my work, I count on Jupiter and Saturn to tell me what's happening.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that's good because at least we've got a square that's regularly happening before the election years.
Yeah.
Now, one year, and I do document this in my March article, it was in late 1995. So it was within a year. It wasn't in 96, but it was when Bill Clinton was his second year. His second administration. So he ran again for president in 96. And it's such a perfect, I don't have the details in front of me now, but I did write about it. And it's clear that he's going to win. I forget I think it's probably the fixed signs. But he's in such a weak position, and it shows you, because he was weakened, as you know, from those scandals. They tried to bring him down. They tried to impeach him.
Yeah.
And so all that is there as well, which is fascinating. And I figured, okay, I get to count this because at least it's within 11 months of when he, So if you go back to that March article, it's at my website there, and you can see when it came out. It's got a date of posted March, I think it was like March 27th. That covers those 100 years from 1916 to 2016.
Okay.
It shows you. So I give a little bit of, and that's one of my favorite things, Sunil. Just look at the history, look at the politics. Look, in this case, it's politics, but what is happening that is verifying the astrology and vice versa? Is it contradictory? If so, then maybe you're looking at the astrology improperly, or maybe using the wrong chart. All those things, so you can keep testing it out.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much, Edith. I would love you to come again on our channel and maybe discuss the USA horoscope. Because I presume James. We both know James. James did 6 months he spent on trying to find the exact time, and
right.
at the same time, if you could show us how you are seeing the US horoscope, the history of US, the dashas, how do you see it? And of course,
you should maybe get James for that. I mean, I could tell you some things, but he's done all the work.
James is a good friend. I mean, I want to get him. He's told me January he's coming. It's January 2017. He'll be coming on our channel. He's a bit tied up.
Not that I couldn't speak about it, but for that particular topic, you might, because he's done the most work on that. Now, for this, I mean, I definitely use that chart. And I was convinced of it as of, I think 9/11 convinced me of it, because it was September 11th, 2001. Came in that chart so powerfully. I liked it before, but I'd used some other charts as well. So I wasn't won over by any particular. I wasn't even necessarily committed to July 4th, 1776. I've been using some different charts. So he's got a, we should give him a lot of credit and a lot of thanks for working with that chart.
Yeah.
And Sagittarius, that Sagittarius-Gemini axis is what I call the nervous system of the world.
Right.
And we seem to be ruling that.
True, very true, very true. Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. I know it's late night, midnight probably over there in US.
Yeah, it's 12:27.
Oh my
yes,
God.
2.5 hours we've gone. Oh well, luckily I'm a night owl.
And it's so great to see you. After such a long
Likewise.
time.
Yeah, likewise.
Brilliant. And we would love you to come and keep on sharing your researches, old ones, new ones. New techniques, old techniques. You're most welcome to our channel.
Okay.
Astrology.
Great. Thank you, Sunil. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay. You too.